in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. How you doing, everybody? It's the 5th of September 2015. I'm your host, Walter, coming to you from the Netherlands. If you want to join the people in the chat, you can do so. Just go to ucy.tv, find the chat link over there, and pick a name and join us. You can ask questions there, and I'll try my best to answer them. Hey guys, how you doing? Vince and Matty Clues, Hopper and Dan, already active. Let's see who else is there. Captain Gringo, Joe, and that's about it. It's not a busy day. 2 Anons. Welcome, Anons. So, what do you guys want to hear today? There is, I got 2 things open, basically. Ancient mythologies, or a book on grammar from 18 something, I don't know, 1879 or so. Good morning, Jules. What's up? Now there were like 3 fallacies left we could do, but you want to know about them, just type in 42 fallacies in Google and see what you can do with that. Should be a list up there. The 42 most known or most used are in there. Alright, so 1 vote for grammar. That's good. That's spelled with an A, Vince. So, lekker bakkie koffie, as we say in Dutch. A nice cup of coffee. Yeah. I hope you all have something to drink as well. Yeah, I think that's grammar. You say like grammar, but I think it's spelled grammar with an A, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not mistaken. Yes, it's with an A, two A's, and then kind of this. It serves as an introduction to the study of languages. Yeah. 1837 even. And yeah, this it's interesting. You vote for a third time, okay? That's nice. Yeah. So I'm not making anything in the background. Dan. Yeah, this is for Oriental tongues, I guess. Also, because I think the writer is especially into that. But the reason why I think you should, I'm not allowed to say that, right? You should be interested in language is because language is a tool that is being used against us, right? I've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating. I think it was about 300 years ago, maybe more, that even the priests could not read. Yes, I already had that coffee done, Dan. And let alone the normal people, you know, they couldn't read. And at a certain point, they started teaching people to read. Now, why do you think that is? Do you think it's because, oh, they care so much about you? Right? So no, that's not the case. The reason why they taught us how to read is so they could better control us. That's what it's for. Right? Think of 1984 with Newspeak. Most people are mind controlled, and that happens through language. Right? So language is the prison within which we can express ourselves. I came up with that also because, you know, I read 1984 a long time ago, and there it was also pointed out that the dictionaries became smaller and smaller, and that took away the capability of the people to express how bad it really was, right? So that's why language should be important to you. So I'll tell you about a little Dutch before we get into this. A little Dutch. Well, I guess that you could call it an inside joke by the people that created this language. In Dutch, when you write down a sentence, and it goes in English also, because there the word sentence also has a double meaning. What does a judge do when he finds you guilty? He sentences you, right? So when you write down a sentence, in Dutch, you do that on a, as we call it, regel, R-E-G-E-L. So first of all, there's the three first letters, R-E-G, Regina. And it also means rule. Right? So if you've written sentence, that also means rule. The same word in Dutch means a written sentence, but then, you know, we used to have these papers on school with all these lines on them. Get in line, right? Don't cross the line, right? So we had these lines, and of course you weren't allowed to cross those, except for a few letters that are supposed to go under the line. And that line is called a regel, which translates to rule also. So see how sentence and rule go together? This is mind manipulation. To give these two words these different meanings. All right. There's another translation for that same word, regel. It's a saying. Would you call that in English? Proverb, I guess. We say in the rule, in the regel, means usually, or commonly, or what was that appeal? Common practice, right? So don't step out of line again, right? Keep to the common practice. Don't you be starting to think about other things, right? All right. So much for the Dutch word regel, regel. Yeah. So if you split that apart, you get reg and el. You all know what el is, right? L. Alright, so I think I've welcomed everybody in the chat. Did anybody join in the meantime? Gringo? No. So Kat, Dan, Hopper, Joe, Jules, Matty, and Vince, and two Anons. Oh, the Anons still held out. Now what's up? Alright, so let's start reading from this. It will, perhaps, be a considerable a priori recommendation of the following treatise that its author is the Baron de Sacy, or Saki. I don't know how to... Yep, I'll type it in chat. And, you can decide for yourself how to pronounce that. One of the most profound linguists of the age. His devotion to the science of language and his extensive acquirements in this department of literature, most especially in the study of the Oriental tongues, certainly give uncommon promise of success in the preparation of a work like the present. To the public, however, the decision respecting its intrinsic value must be surrendered. The translator is conscious that its worth, whatever it may be, is by no means enhanced by the dress in which it now appears, but he submits it with diffidence, I don't know that word, to the clemency of those under whose eyes it may chance to fall. No, a priori is not without cause. No, I don't think so. It reminds me of the discussion we had with Gino Denning. There are certain a priori knowledge. Maybe axioms, but so priori means before, right? Prior, right? So it translates English prior, prior to. It is proper to acquaint the public with the manner in which the translator has proceeded. Let's see. A priori knowledge, that is, justified by arguments of a certain kind. So it's not really an axiom, right? A priori, a type of constructed language. Oh, really? A priori estimate, an estimate for the size of the solution of a differential equation. A priorability, that is derived by deductive reasoning. Yeah, that's what it reminded me of. You start with some a priori knowledge and then you can derive things from that, right? Alright. It is proper to acquaint the public with the manner in which the translator has proceeded in adapting this little treatise to American use. He has omitted, in many places, discussions about words belonging to the French language alone, especially such as could be of no use to an English reader. Now, he has used his best judgment in substituting poetical examples drawn from the storehouse of English literature for such poetical examples in French as were used by the author, and could not, from the nature of the case, be properly translated into English. He has altered some French proper names to names more in accordance with the genius of the English language. He has not confined himself to an exactly literal translation of every word as it respects mode, tense, etc. When another form of the word appeared, preferably in English, and, lastly, he has here and there, though but seldom, inserted a short note of his own, distinguished from the rest by the letter TR, capital TR from translator. When technical words are found in this translation which do not belong to the English language, the reader will bear in mind that they are translations, literally so, of words equally strange to the French. In this second edition, many typographical errors have been corrected. No other alteration or consequence has been made. The translator is gratified that the public seems disposed to ratify the high opinion he, with others, has formed of the excellence of this little treatise. This was 1837. Author's dedication is the next heading. To my son. For you, my dear son, this little work was undertaken, and to you I dedicate it, convinced that nothing is more necessary than early to accustom ourselves to systemize the knowledge we acquire. And I have thought it my duty to put within the reach of your youthful capacity the first principles of general grammar. Very good. In order that they may serve you as a guide in the study of languages, to which you are about to devote the first years of your education. If you seize these principles, if by their light you discover the relation which ought to subsist between the different parts of speech, in order faithfully to express the connection of those ideas which unite in forming the conclusions of our understandings. Right, so now I'm going to skip all of that because that was kind of in brackets, one could say. If you seize these principles, the diversity of means which languages employ to accomplish the end will present you nothing painful or forbidding. Alright, so you just heard there him explaining the connections between grammar and logic, right? Or, in other words said, knowledge and understanding. You will, in this way, accustom yourself to refer to well-digested general principles, the different branches of each of those sciences which you may successively acquire, and you will contract the happy habit of connecting your ideas, of combining them, of tracing back consequences to principles, effects to causes, and thus of weighing well your opinions and those of the persons with whom you may associate. In whatever condition you may be called to serve your country, yeah, sounds like altruism. You will reap the fruits of this method, peculiarly fitted as it is to train up the understanding and to preserve the heart from the illusions and enchantment of the passions. May heaven deign, D-E-I-G-N, I've never seen that word. May heaven deign to bless these first efforts of thy Father to form the mind and heart, and to render thee one day worthy of the eternal author, capitalized both, eternal author, of thy being, and of the noble destination to which he calls thee, that of laboring to promote thine own happiness in contribution to promote that of thy species. So dan, as we say in Dutch, like Baba, render thee one day worthy of the eternal author of thy being. Sounds really religious, right? And of course, eternal is capitalized here very correctly. Why? Because eternal is a absolute property, as the Indians would say. Something like that should not appear in the material world that we live in. And so this eternal author of thy being is referring to something supernatural. That's why it's religious, or even what's the word I'm looking for here? Can't find it. Maybe it'll come back to me later. Alright, so that's one thing that springs out to me. And another one is that of laboring to promote thine own happiness in contributing to promote that of thy species. As if you have a duty to your species, right? Again, the altruism idea. Now this next heading is called Advertisement by the author. I don't know what this is going to be about, but I think it's probably worth reading. Deign is a word that I never saw. 1. Do something that one considers to be beneath one's own dignity. Or 2. Consider to give something. Okay, very good Dan, thank you. The little work which I now publish under the title of Principles of General Grammar Adapted to the Capacity of Youth is little else than an abstract of the best writings on this subject which have appeared in France, and especially of the portrayal, general and rational grammar, of Bozy's general grammar, and of the natural history of speech and the universal grammar by Korte Gebelin. Alright, so what should spring out? Zich vervaardigen? Verwaardigen, okay. Thank you, Dan. Dan. Yeah. Anyway, adapted to the capacity of youth, right? So, there again, you can see that they stopped teaching the trivium, the knowledge, the knowledge or the grammar, the logic or understanding, and wisdom or rhetoric, because they didn't want us to make those connections, right? Our ideas are supposed to be non-relating to each other, you know? And another thing is that it is adapted to the capacity of youth, you know, even for a lot of people, including me, this is not easy stuff, right? So there have been claims that people have grown more intelligent, but that might not necessarily be the case, since they taught this stuff, this rather difficult stuff, to the youth in those days. And also, I remember, what's his name again? You guys know I'm bad with names, right? This biologist from the morphogenetic fields. He claims that if a species has learned something, then when presented to other entities from that species, you know, be it ape or rat or human, they will more easily understand it, more easily solve it. And so it goes for intelligence intelligence tests, right? The more we do them, the more easy a new human will be able to solve the problems being presented to them in these intelligence tests. At least that's the idea of this biologist, whose name I can't remember, I have forgotten. Alright, continuing. In adopting the greater part of the principles of these learned writers, I have disposed them in the order in which appear to me the most fitted to show their justice and to portray them distinctly. I have stripped them of every metaphysical and polemical discussion. I have discarded, as far as possible, every scientific expression, although shorter and more convenient to substitute them for terms taken from ordinary discourse. Alright, so, you know, we're even lucky. He's not going to use all of these scientific expressions, but has found more understandable words for us. I've made no application of the principles of general grammar to particular examples, taken either in the French or any other language, except so far as to make myself intelligible. This has appeared to me an indispensable precaution in order to give the greatest possible generality to the principle, and to avoid generalizing what is peculiar to certain languages. Many valuable writers, in treating of the principles of universal grammar, have not, in my opinion, taken sufficient care to avoid this last mistake. If I myself have sometimes swerved from the rule, it has only been to show that the peculiar usages of certain languages do not contradict general principles. No, they don't. Right, so special grammar can differ from language to language. Not so with general grammar. Hold on, guys. Let me roll a ciggy here. I have entirely suppressed that part of universal grammar which relates to the elements of speech and the art of writing. The consideration of the first of these subjects, and comma VIZ, it's probably some abbreviation. I've seen it before, but I still don't know what it is. The consideration of the first of these subjects, VIZ, of the natural organs of speech, and of the nature and variety of the sounds and articulations which we produce by their help, is without doubt well fitted to cause us to admire the power and wisdom of the Creator. Again, this religious undertone, as if he's like implying that the Creator, or whoever he's got in mind there, created a language for us. Well, that's not. That's probably not what it is. My personal philosophy in that regard goes a bit like, the underpinning is that the universe was created or existed. I don't even know if it was created. The universe exists for life to express itself. And there is such a thing as evolution. But not like the racist ideas that Darwin holds. And that in order for life to express itself more clearly, it created these changes in human bodies so that they were even able to start talking, right? And so we ourselves created the language. Humans created this language. And was later hijacked. Alright, well fitted to cause us to admire the power and wisdom of the Creator, as well as the variety of the means which he, and now it's not a capital, uses to accomplish his designs. Again, no capital letters for he and his. That's strange, right? It is also of great use in researches into the science of etymology. Alright, so now it's a science. It used to be a science. I didn't know that. And into comparative grammar of ancient and modern idioms. It belongs not, however, to primary, nor even to ordinary instruction. It is nature and imitation which teach children the use they must make of their organs of speech in order to pronounce their mother tongue. And it is also by imitation and not by a scientific knowledge of the organs of speech and of the principles of grammar that the man more advanced in life articulates foreign that the man more advanced in life learns articulations foreign to the language of the country which gave him birth. As to the art of writing, that ingenious method of rendering speech permanent by painting articulate sounds, and thus making the communication of ideas independent of distance, of time or space. Right? And so, the art of writing, the sound and luminous principles of general grammar ought to be considered a perfect theory, from which all nations which have adopted an alphabetical or syllabical method of writing have more or less departed. However, imperfect may be the usage in point of orthography. Nevertheless, that we must yield from that, we must learn how each nation has agreed to write the words which compose its language. Yeah? Is that so? Right? How each nation has agreed? You know, were you ever asked as to how we are supposed to write blog, for instance? To come up with a new word? You know, a nation doesn't agree. It's impossible. A nation is an idea. It doesn't have an own consciousness. It doesn't have a mind. It doesn't have a tongue. It can't speak. It can't hear. So how, you know, does he come up with this, like, how each nation has agreed to write? No. This is not something we agreed upon. This is top down. A total reform in orthography, which should aim to render writing perfectly comfortable to pronunciation, must be regarded as it respects most nations, as a philosophical chimera to which custom will never yield. And a partial reform which, correcting in certain points the discordance existing between writing and pronunciation, should suffer a part of the abuses to remain, would in some sort consecrate those it had spared, and would not, moreover, be without great disadvantages, especially as it regards the science of etymology. Etymology, one of my favorite subjects. This is hard to read for me, you know. It's not easy. There's whole sentences I don't understand, and the way it is structured. I hope you guys get something out of it. For the same reason, I have suppressed what might be said on the subject of punctuation, the system of which is so imperfect, even among those nations which have most multiplied its signs. I have almost always preserved those technical expressions which were consecrated by usage. However imperfect they were, that the child who shall have studied these principles may nevertheless be able to make use of those elementary books designed for the study of the languages. Many paragraphs and even whole chapters will be found enclosed in brackets. These should be passed over by children who are studying for the first time these principles of grammar. I may sometimes have fallen into error, especially on a subject which I have devoted no very large portion of my time. Perhaps, too, I may not always have seized the most simple, the most precise, and, at the same time, the most intelligible expression. I shall receive with gratitude the remarks of all whom their natural talents, a profound study of the subjects, or long experience in the department of public instruction. See? That's a giveaway, right? It's like a teacher, right? Public instruction. See that it's top down, it's not that something we agree upon. Or long experience in the department of public instruction shall have qualified to rectify the mistakes into which I may have fallen. See how many commas there are in this sentence. 1, 2, 3, only 3, right? 3 commas in one sentence. I shall esteem myself happy if this little work should merit their attention, comma, and if they should judge it fitted to render easy to children a study sufficiently dry of itself, comma, and often forbidding from the aspect under which it is presented. Dot. To make myself useful is my only wish. To have attained this end will be to me the most flattering reward. Preface to the second edition by the author is the next heading. Yeah, did you guys hear that? Because the word public just keeps popping up in the chat also. Did you guys hear Ron Stevens with his guest talk about what public actually is? I have permitted the preceding advertisement to remain as in the first edition, but I ought to add a word in relation to the changes I have made in this. Those who will take the trouble to compare the 2 editions will find that the alterations consist in a few corrections, some difference in the arrangements of the matter, and a great many additions. The reception with which the public has honored the first edition of these Principles of General Grammar imposed an obligation upon me to spare no labor in order to render them more exact and complete. And by habitual application of these principles, by meditation upon the difficulties which presented themselves, and finally, by comparing the habits of many different languages, whose particular grammars I have studied for that purpose, I have collected a mass of observations which have enabled me to resolve difficulties and to reduce to a common analogy common analogy things which appeared widely to deviate from it. It's fracking one sentence. The corrections and additions made in this new edition are, at least for the most part, the fruit of this labor. I do not pretend, however, that among these additions there are not many which can with difficulty be understood by children and beginners. Of this number is the disquisition concerning the extension and comprehension of appellative nouns, into which I have entered in chapter 4, part 1st. So what the heck is that? Of this number is the disquisition, never heard of that, concerning the extension and comprehensions of appellative, appellative, nouns, into which I have entered in chapter 4 of part 1st. I could not, however, omit these remarks, as they were necessary to serve as a foundation for the distinction which I was about to make between circumstantial and qualificative adjectives, which appear in chapter 7 of the same part. The third chapter of part 2nd, in which I treat the subject of cases, has received a great many additions, which I think cannot but throw light upon the design of these grammatical inflections. I thought he was not going to use difficult words. My God. Inflections, which are unknown to our language. I think we dug up inflections somewhere before when we started doing grammar, like 6 months ago or so, or a year ago. Chapter 4th of the same part, in which I have treated of tenses, with a capital T, tenses, what the heck is that? And the 8th chapter on the subject of the modes of, verbs, have been considerably enlarged and, so to speak, entirely made anew. These 2 chapters are those in which I have discovered the greatest number of inaccuracies. Right, so I had to scroll over this. It's asterisk. We have here retained the preface of the 2nd edition of these principles of general grammar, insomuch as but a small number of alterations have been made in the edition we now present to the public. Yeah. This is just my suspicious mind, right? This part of this sentence could just as well have ended like I'm going to read now. Alterations have been made in the edition we now present. Right? But it says, we now present to the public. Like, is there a different edition that they have been presented to, let's say, people that go to higher education and university or something? That's just me being suspicious here, right? But why add to the publics? You know, so that's why I'm suspicious. And those, besides, of little importance. They consist merely in a reformation of the style, in some places, and the removal of some little obscurity in certain expressions. There has been, however, no change in regard to the principles of the general plan of the work. The 2nd edition of the Principles of General Grammar was translated into German and published in 1804 at Halle and Leipzig by Mr. J. Self, Vater, then professor of the University of Halle and now professor of and librarian in that of Koningsberg. This learned continuator of the what the heck is that? Mithridates of Adelung, in the author of Hebrew, Polish and German grammars and of several other works relative to general grammar and to the study of languages. His something, I can't read that, just published at Berlin in Latin and German a catalogue of the language of the world. Languages of the world. Under this title, Lingarum, something Latin. Alright, not gonna read that. What relates to the tenses? So, okay, what the heck is tenses, guys? Let's Google that. Google! Tenses. Tenses of verbs. Tenses in English grammar. What shall we pick? English grammar? Tenses in English grammar. Let's see. I'm gonna wait for this to load. Oh, like that. The past, the present, and the future. Ah, okay. Easy stuff. What relates to the tenses will present, I think, no serious difficulties. No, not will present. That's because I was just doing the tenses, right? Will present, I think, no serious difficulties. As to the theory of modes, it was necessary either to renounce the idea of explaining it or to assent to the operations of our intellectual faculties, to analyze them, to classify them, and deduce from them the variations of modes. Then it says ... so let's see, what are modes? Modes in English language. Modes of communication, of modes, let's see, general grammar. Let's see if we can get anything. Mood. Modes. Of modes in relation to verbs. Let's see what this is. Moods or modes? This opens up somewhere in the middle of a book. We therefore, he adds, pass over these matters and all of like kind as being rather among the elegances and particular languages, and therefore to be learned from the particular grammar of each tongue, than among the essentials of language, which essentials alone are the subject of inquiry in the treatise on universal grammar. Modes or moods or modes of verbs. In modes in relation to verbs, it is by no means easy to give a definition. It is perhaps generally thought that those forms of expressions to which we appropriate the name of modes are intended to represent different modifications of the action of the verb. Okay. Actions and states of being, says Dr. Crombie, may be predicated as either certain or contingent, free or necessary, possible or impossible, obligatory or optional. In short, as they take place in variety of ways, they may be spoken of as diversified in their modes of production. This is true, but a mode of production is not a mode of action or existence. Those are two very important words, action and existence. So that this subsequent definition of mode, there's the VIZ again, as that which expresses the mode or manner of existence does not accord with his statement of that which gives rise to it. The general definition of modes referred to above is sufficiently refuted by the Britannica. Amo, amen, ama, says the writer, do not signify modes of loving, for modes of loving are loving little, loving much, loving long. Murray tells us that mode is a particular form of the verb showing the manner in which the being, action, or passion is represented. But the phrases I may love and let me love indicate no difference in the manner of loving. Any difference which exists is not to be found in the action itself, but in the state and circumstances of the agent. In the former case, he declares his liberty to perform the action. In the latter, he asks for liberty to do it. Strange. Harris tells us that the modes of verbs exhibit some way or other the soul and its affections. It has been justly said in reply to this statement that it does not discriminate between the meaning of mode and the object of language in general, all language being intended to exhibit the soul and its affections. A second definition of mode by Murray is more to the purpose. Mode consists in the change which the verb undergoes to signify various intentions of the mind and various modifications and circumstances of action. It may be objected, however, that unless the auxiliary be regarded as a part of the verb itself undergoes no changes. We say, I love, I may love, let me love, nor is the object of the assumed change stated in the concluding part of the definition with sufficient precision. A similar objection lies also against the definition of Britannica. Grammatical modes of verbs are concise modes of expression in some of those combinations of thoughts which occur most frequently, and of which assertion is an essential part. The commendable effort made by the powerful writer of the article, Grammar, in that work, to generalize the definition deprives it of distinctness and perspicuity. It is possible that, in consistency with his own principles, he might have given a more intelligible account of the matter. Affirmation is, as we have seen, the essence of a verb. It follows then that, in every mode, there must be affirmation. But affirmation may have different subjects, or the verb may affirm different things. It may assert something concerning the action or the agent. It may declare that a certain action is performed by a certain agent, or that he has the liberty or power to perform it, or that he wishes to perform it, or wishes that others should perform it. The modes of verbs are then contrivances, no idea, in language to indicate these, and similar differences in the subjects of affirmation or in the things affirmed by the verb. The indicative simply asserts that a connection exists between a certain action, brackets open. We confine our illustrations to verbs of action, for the purpose of securing simplicity, brackets close, and a certain agent, as I write. The subjunctive asserts that an agent has liberty or power to perform a certain action, as I may write. The imperative asserts that he desires to perform it, or to have it performed, as let me write, let them write, etc. In all these cases the verb asserts. No doubt can exist of this. In any instance, with the exception of the last, it might possibly be thought that in the imperative, write thou, there is no assertion, but on examination it appears most manifestly to be a compendious of abbreviated form of asserting the desire, or if you will, the determination of the speaker that the action of writing should be performed. It is equivalent with I desire or command you to write. Alright, so this continues on for a bit. So if you want to know more about that, you'll have to check the link in the post in the chat. We're going to continue with where we were. It was necessary further in order to complete the subject to consider propositions which are the expressions of the operations of the understanding and the motions of the will, at first independently and then under those relations which bind and chain them in discourse. Had I possessed more talent, I might perhaps have infused more interest into the explanation of this truly philosophical subject. What subject is he talking about? Propositions, right? But at least I may give this testimony for myself, that I have neglected no means which could enable me to treat it with precision and perspicuity. Alright guys, hold on a sec. Blah, blah. The third part, with the exception of the first chapter and a portion of the second, is entirely new, and the models of analysis of the English and Latin languages contained in the fifth and sixth chapter must be considered as the result of the whole work. The third part should not be studied until a perfect knowledge of the first two parts has been acquired. The fourth chapter especially requires a mind already familiar with analysis. I must here insist upon the advice which I have already given, not to require beginners to study in the first two parts those portions included in brackets. A distinction should also be made between these portions of the work themselves. Some should be studied at a second perusal, while the study of others should be deferred still later. It is only by repeated application of these principles that we can hope to naturalize them, as it were, in the minds of children, and to awaken their understanding, which must act in this work still more powerfully than their memory. It is therefore the duty of instructors of being thoroughly imbued with these principles themselves, to cause their pupils to apply them often, and to a great number of examples. In this way the pupils will, as it were, instinctively employ them. Or rather, they will discover in themselves, by the exercise of their own understanding, those principles which were at first trusted to their memories, and when they shall thus have appropriated them to themselves, they will run no risk of forgetting them. In giving propositions or phrases to be analyzed, however, this kind of labor should be proportioned to the degree of the pupil's advancement, and if he meet with problems the solution of which he has never been taught, brackets open, which should be avoided as much as possible, brackets close, great care should be taken to cause them to be understood, that he may never find the system at fault. I ought perhaps to apologize for having coined some terms which may possibly displease fastidious ears. My justification in this respect is confined to the remark that I have used with the greatest caution a liberty which cannot be denied to him, which is obliged to look at objects under new points of view, and thus create new existences, so to speak, in the intellectual world. Yeah, it's good that he says, so to speak, because you cannot create existence. It's impossible. Among the number of the most flattering testimonies of approbation which the first edition of these Principles of Grammar, general grammar, has obtained, I ought to reckon the pains which Mr. N. Lang Nissen, the professor of the Greek language at Copenhagen, has taken to translate translate it into the Danish language at the request of Messrs. Munter and Gulberg, and I seize this opportunity of presenting my thanks to these learned men for the favorable opinion which they have expressed in respect to my work, and to M. Nissen in particular, for the observation he has made in the preface to his translation, relative to some principles which I had adopted, and which he believed ought not to be allowed. I have weighed the remarks of M. Nissen with the greatest attention, and he will see that, after his example, I have made of the numeratives, with a capital N, in this edition, a chapter by itself. If I have not yielded to his other observations respecting the words to which he assigns the usual denominations of demonstrative, relative or conjunctive, possessive, indefinite, and interrogative pronouns, it is because I still continue convinced that none of these words belong to the class of pronouns. Without entering into any discussion of this subject, as it would be contrary to the plan of my work, I was yet bound to throw more light upon my principles, and further to unfold the motives of my opinion. It was an homage which I owe to the worth of M. Nissen, and perhaps I shall be so fortunate as to obtain his suffrage. I could have wished to have been able to connect with this second edition a sketch of Latin grammar, drawn up comfortably to my system. The last chapter of Part 3 will supply to a certain extent the place of such a work, which multiplied avocations have prevented me from executing. Alright, so that was that. Next heading is contents. Part 1 is of the proposition. It is necessarily composed of a subject, an attribute and a verb, and always accompanied by a comparative, expressed or understood. Chapter 2 of the verb, substantive and attributive verbs, active, passive, and neuter verbs. Chapter 3 of the subject and attribute of a proposition. The subject may be either simple or compound. The simple subject may be either complex or incomplex. The attribute may be either simple or compound. The simple attribute may be either complex or incomplex. Chapter 4 of the noun. Proper nouns, appellative nouns, abstract nouns, extension and comprehension of appellative nouns, or appellative, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Chapter 5 of the article, determinative article and demonstrative article. Chapter 6 is of the pronoun, pronouns of the first, second and third persons, reflexive pronouns. Chapter 7 of the adjective, two different uses of the adjective, circumstantial adjectives and qualificative adjectives. Chapter 8 of numeratives. Chapter 9 of preposition. Preposition. So there's proposition and preposition. Distinction between the employment of words in an absolute and in a relative manner. Definition of a relation. It is composed of an... This is just the chapter name. It is composed of an antecedent and a consequent, exponent of a relation, a short account of cases, several consecutive relations. The consequent term is also called a complement. Chapter 10 of the adverb, 11 of conjunction, 12 of interjection, and 13 mixed words. Pronominal adjectives, conjunctive adjectives, other conjunctive words, negative, affirmative, and prohibitive adverbs. And then part 2, more chapters 1, 2, and so on. Part 3, chapters 1, 2, and so on. So, part 1 of Principles of General Grammar, chapter 1 of the proposition. It is necessarily composed of a subject, an attribute, and a verb, and always accompanied by a comparative expressed or understood. Alright, so proposition, subject, attribute, verb, and accompanied by a comparative, expressed or understood. We speak only to make known our thoughts to others. Yeah. That should answer the first question last week. I don't know if you remember. What do you want to get out of it? No. It's, I don't like that question. Yeah. We speak only to make known our thoughts to others. Yeah. Oops. Hold on guys, I'm rolling a ciggy. Yep, smoke one more. Suppose a dumb man, wishing to inform us that he has been bitten by a mad dog, hey, I remember we did this once before, presents us a picture in which he himself is represented to the life, followed by a dog whose tail hanging between his legs, haggard eye and bristling hair, point out the malady with which he is attacked, and that this dog is represented as holding between his teeth the unfortunate man's leg. At the sight of this picture we should immediately understand that he who presented it to us had been bitten by a mad dog, and we should feel ourselves inclined to procure for him the assistance he needed. Could this man, enjoying the use of speech, approach us and say, "I've been bitten by a mad dog"? These words would inform us of his misfortune as fully as the painting which he might have shown us. Words, then, are the picture of our thoughts and serve to give other men a knowledge of the objects which are presented to our minds and of the judgment which we form concerning them. Yeah. Words and pictures. Imagination. Image. Right? Alright, where were we? Principles of grammar next. Whenever we form a judgment of any thing, we can distinguish the thing of which we are thinking from the quality which we perceive connected with that thing. This is about subject and attribute. The thing of which we are thinking is called the subject. The quality which we perceive connected with it is called the attribute. If I say Victor is little, Victor is the subject, for it is that about which I am thinking. Little is the attribute, for it is the quality which I perceive connected with Victor. In saying Victor is little, I inform those who hear me that I judge the quality of little to belong to Victor. In this phrase, Victor's father is too good, the subject is expressed by the words Victor's father, and too good is the attribute. In this expression, children who will not learn are like the brutes. Right? So, this is not about children, it's about the expression, right? Children who will not learn are like the brutes. The subject is expressed by the words children who will not learn, and the attribute by like the brutes. Besides the idea of a thing and the idea of a quality, this is about verb. Besides the idea and the thing of a thing and the idea of a quality, every judgment of our minds include also the idea of the union of the thing with the quality. When I form the judgment that Victor is little, I have presented to my mind the idea of a thing, Victor, and the idea of a quality, littleness. But this is not all. I have also the idea of the union of this thing with this quality. I believe that the subject really exists with this attribute. And it is in this that the judgment of my mind properly consists. Huh. This reminds me of triangles. Blue triangle, red triangle. Right? So the subject really exists with this attribute. You know, they say that if you take away all the attributes, then the subject is zero. Right? So if you take away, like for instance with a triangle, you know, it has 3 sides, that will be an attribute, right? Is that correct? This triangle has 3 sides. I don't know if it's an attribute or not. But I remember something like that when they tried defining a man, for instance. Remember that joke about non-feathered biped? And so if you try to define a man by stating all the properties that a man might have, and then you take away all of these properties, then there's nothing left of the man, right? So can a subject even exist without its attributes? That's a question which probably should be answered no. A subject cannot really exist without attributes. Alright, next. Since language is the picture of our thoughts, it is not enough in order to represent the judgments which we form, that words should express merely the subject and the attribute. They must also express their union, the existence of the subject with the attribute. This, in fact, the case in the example given above, in Victor is little, the word Victor expresses the thing of which I think. The subject. The word little expresses the quality which I perceive connected with that thing, the attribute. The word is expresses the connection of the thing with the quality. The existence of the subject with the attribute. This word, which serves to express the connection of the subject with the attribute, is called a verb. It is this, which gives life to language, which without it would be weak and unintelligible. If I should say simply Victor Little, I should expose myself to be imperfectly understood by those whom I addressed, because I should not have expressed with sufficient clearness the connection which I perceived between the subject and the attribute. But when I add the word is and say Victor is little, it is immediately comprehended that I judge that Victor exists with a quality expressed by the word little. Every collection of words composed of a subject, an attribute, and a verb is called a proposition. And there can be no proposition unless there is a union of a subject, a verb, and an attribute. Okay? Hold on, guys. This lighter is almost empty. There are some languages in which the verb can be suppressed, but its place is supplied by certain forms which the subject and attribute then assume, in which express the idea of the existence of the subject with the attribute as perfectly as the verb itself could do it. Even in English, although regularly, the verb must be expressed. Yet, if you suppress it, as children and foreigners often do, the thought may be made intelligible, either by the arrangement of the words which compose the proposition by means of gesture, or the tone with which it is pronounced. If Stephen, for example, speaking of his little brother, should say, "My brother little, me larger than he," we should easily understand that he meant to say, "My brother is little and I am larger than he." We make use of speech only to communicate our thoughts to others, and consequently our language is always addressed to someone. This is spelled like two words, some and one. To someone, right? In Dutch we have pasted those two words together also. Some would be iets and one would be man, and we get iemand. It's also made up of two words, some and one. Those to whom we speak may know that we are addressing them, we call upon them either by name or by some equivalent expression proper to fix their situation. Thus, I say, "Victor, you are not attentive." Or, "Lord, I am thy creature." "Sir, are you my friend?" These words, Victor, Lord, and Sir, make no part of the proposition. Okay. In Dutch we would say those are persoonlijke voornaamwoorden. Personal pre-name words. I know it doesn't sound like anything in English. There is voornaam. What is voornaamwoord in English? Translate Dutch to English. Google Translate. Voornaamwoord. Pronoun. Right? And because we're talking about a person, we say personal pronoun. Persoonlijk voornaamwoord. Personal pronoun. I shall call this part of speech a compellative, from a Latin word which signifies to address, to accost. All discourse supposes a compellative, but it frequently happens that the compellative is left understood, inasmuch as the circumstances, the gesture, the attitude of him who speaks, or the situation of those who listen, readily supply it. Compellative. Right. Google compellative. Compellative. 1. Grammar. The name by which a person is addressed. An appellative. So we have compellative and appellative. That's all. That's all. Let's see if we can get a better one. Let's see what this is. Compellative. 1. Grammar. The N stands for noun, right? The name by which a person is addressed. An appellative. Appel. Je m'appelle Voltaire. The French. It's from French. Appel means name. My name is Walter. Je m'appelle Voltaire. Alright, we know enough about that. Chapter 2. It is the verb, as we have already remarked, which gives life to discourse, for it is this which connects the subject and attribute, and upon this connection the whole sense of the proposition depends. It is therefore necessary, first of all, to endeavor thoroughly to understand the nature of the verb. The only verb to be found in the proposition which we have heretofore given as example is the verb to be. This might suffice for the expression of all the judgments of our minds. There is, however, a large number of other verbs which serve to vary and abridge discourse. The verb to be expresses simply the existence of the subject and its connection with the attribute, but it does not determine that attribute, and another word must be employed to express it. If, for example, I say, the soup is salt, the candle is extinguished, the attribute is not expressed by the verb is, but by the word salt and extinguished. Every other verb than the verb to be comprises it in itself this verb and an attribute. When I say Augustus plays, the word Augustus expresses the subject. The word plays is a verb, which includes in itself the sense of the verb to be. And you could also say Augustus is playing. And of the attribute playing, for Augustus plays is the same thing as Augustus is playing. Yeah, that's what I said, right? In this phrase, God sees what we do and hear and what we say, then why did he ask Cain or Abel where his brother was? He sees and knows everything. Why did he ask? In this phrase, God sees what we do and hears what we say, the words sees, do, hears, and say are verbs, which include the sense of the verb to be and an attribute. It is the same thing as to say God is seeing what we are doing and he is hearing what we are saying. Every word which comprises in itself the sense of the verb to be and that of an attribute is therefore a verb. I call these verbs attribute or concrete verbs because they comprise an attribute joined to the idea of existence. And there's an asterisk there. Let's see what it says. The asterisk. The word concrete, which comes from the Latin, signifies compounded, formed from the union of several things. It is precisely the reverse of abstract, a word that also derived from the Latin, signifying separated. The verb to be, I think we're going to substantive verb now. The verb to be, which expresses only the idea of existence with relation to an indeterminate attribute, is called a substantive or abstract verb. The verb to be is often employed as an attributive verb, for example in the following phrase. God was before all ages. God was before all ages. Well, this would probably coincide with the idea that time doesn't exist in an absolute world. Time only exists in the material world. It is then synonymous with exist. What is synonymous with exist? I don't get it. The verb to be is often employed as an attributive verb. For example, in the following phrase, God was before all ages. It is then synonymous with exist. It is as if it were said, God existed or was existing before all ages. Right, so the word is can also be exist. Interesting. Because the word is in the word exist. Ex is out. Ist is Deutsch, German, which means is. Yeah, maybe you've heard me say this before, and I came up with this idea myself. I tried tearing apart the word existence, right? Ex is out. Ist is German. This is. So you get out and is. And stands, which I made stands. That which stands outside is existence. The attribute comprehended in the signification of an attributive verb sometimes expresses an action which the subject performs, and then the verb is called an active verb. Example, Charlotte studies. This is the same as to say Charlotte is studying, which shows that the verb studies is an attributive verb. The attribute studying denotes an action which Charlotte, who is the subject, performs. Thus, studies is an attributive active verb. Now we go to passive verb. Sometimes the attribute comprehended in the signification of the verb denotes an action which the subject does not perform, but which is performed upon it by something else, and which the subject sustains in spite of itself, or at least without its concurrence. In this case, the verb is called passive. When I say Sophia beats her dog, which means Sophia is beating her dog, I use an attributive active verb for beats, denotes... I read that wrong. I use an attributive active verb. For beats denotes an action performed by Sophia, who is the subject. But if I say the dog has been beaten, I use an attributive passive verb. For to be beaten does not express an action of the dog, who is the subject, but an action performed by someone else upon the dog, in spite of himself, or at least without his concurrence. In English, the passive verb is always compounded of the substantive verb and another word which expresses the attribute. But in some languages, the passive verb expresses by a single word the idea of the verb together with that of the attribute. In Latin, for instance, we say actively, Victor verberat, Victor beats, and passively, Victor verberatur, Victor is beaten. The single word verberatur signifies as much as the two English words is beaten. Verb, yeah, werk. Verb, work. Well, it's not etymologically perfect, but verb, in Dutch we say work. If I translate it literally, we get work word, werkwoord. And so verb and work, well, it's because of the K, which is pronounced more in the back of your mouth, and the B is more pronounced in the front of your mouth, that it's not etymologically sound. But for the rest, there seems to be an etymological tie between these two words. Work and verb. Right? Work is an action, right? Sometimes the attribute comprehended in the signification of the verb expresses neither an action performed by the subject nor an action performed upon the subject by something else. The quality of the subject independent of all action, simply a mode of being. Alright, so we missed an asterisk somewhere. The asterisk says, I place among the number of active verbs those which signify possessions, as in English the verbs to have, to possess. For we may consider possessions as an action exerted by him who possesses upon the thing possessed. And in fact, to possess is susceptible of the passive form, to be possessed. In Latin we say in the same manner, habere, to have. See, there's the etymological tie. Habere, to have. H-A-B-A, H-A-V-A. And there you see that the B and the V are etymologically perfectly tied. And in the passive, habiri, to be had, to be possessed, to be held, etc. This word, simply a mode of being. Then the verb is called neuter. This word denotes that it is neither active or passive. In this proposition, God exists from all eternity. The attributive verb exists, which means is existing, is a neuter verb, because the attribute existing denotes neither an action of God, nor an action performed upon God by something else, but a simple quality. It is the same with the following proposition. The book belongs to me. The word belongs is an attributive neuter verb, for the attribute belonging expresses only a simple quality, a mode of being independent of all actions. Alright guys, that was chapter 2 of part 1. Moving on to chapter 3. Of the subject and attribute of a proposition. The subject may be either simple or compound. The simple subject may be either complex or incomplex. The attribute may be either simple or compound. The simple attribute may be either complex or incomplex. We have before said that every proposition is necessarily composed of a subject, a verb, and an attribute. Yeah. So you could also, that's what I'm thinking here now, you could also say that every proposition must say something about existence, right? Although the definition of existence as we read it from the Cliff Notes was a bit broader, but I guess it still holds. As the verb serves to connect the two other parts of the proposition, on the knowledge of this depends the knowledge of the subject and the attribute. It is easy to discover the verb in a proposition, since it is always either the substantive verb to be or an attributive verb, that is to say, a word which is equivalent to the verb to be and an attribute. Having shown the nature of the verb, we will now treat missing asterisk again, but it's not important. We will now treat of the different kinds of words which serve to express the two other parts of a proposition, the subject and the attribute. We must first, however, learn to distinguish with accuracy these two parts. Hence, strict attention must be paid to the following observations. The subject may be simple or compound. The subject is simple when it denotes but a single thing, whether the nature of that thing be determined by one idea merely or by several ideas, which all conspire to its determination. It is compound when it denotes several things, the nature of which is determined by ideas independent of each other. When I say, peaches are an excellent fruit, the subject peaches is simple. It denotes one thing, the nature of which is determined by a single idea. If I say, autumnal peaches, which are very much exposed, and I arrive to perfect maturity, are an excellent fruit. The subject is still simple, for it denotes but one thing. But the nature of this thing is determined by several ideas, which all conspire to complete the full idea of the subject. Alright? On the contrary, in this phrase, peaches, apricots, and plums are excellent fruits, the subject is compound, for it comprehends several things, the nature of which is determined by ideas independent of each other. So, if I'm not mistaken, the subject in Dutch is onderwerp. And, we got this at school too, with grammar. But they never explained it in this way. That you can have different kinds of subjects, right? We only learned one kind of subject. A simple subject may be either incomplex or complex. Asterisk. Complex, a word derived from the Latin, signifies that which embraces or comprehends in itself several parts, no one of which can be abstracted without changing the nature of the whole composed of these various parts. It is incomplex when it denotes a thing, the nature of which is determined by a single idea only. Complex when it denotes a thing, the nature of which is determined by several ideas. Thus, in an example already given, peaches are an excellent fruit, the simple subject is at the same time incomplex. In the other example, autumnal peaches, which are very much exposed and arrive to perfect maturity, are an excellent fruit, the simple subject is complex, for the principal idea peaches is modified by that of the season, autumn, and those of a favorable exposure and perfect maturity. It is the same with the attribute. This is either simple or compound. The attribute is simple when it expresses but a single quality of the subject, whether that quality be determined by a single idea or by the union of several, which depend upon each other. It is compound when it expresses different qualities of the same subject, determined by ideas independent of each other. If then I say, peaches are excellent, the attribute is simple and determined by a single idea. If I say, peaches are more agreeable to the taste than the other fruits which nature presents us in the same season, the attribute is still simple, because it expresses but a single quality, but this quality is determined by several ideas, which all unite to complete its representation. On the other hand, in this sentence, peaches are agreeable to the taste, delight the smell, and charm the sight, the attribute is compound, because it expresses three distinct qualities, entirely independent of each other. A simple attribute may be incomplex or complex. It is incomplex when the quality which it expresses is determined by a single idea, complex when this quality is determined by several ideas. In the first example of a simple attribute above given, peaches are excellent, the simple attribute is incomplex. In the second, peaches are more agreeable to the taste than the other fruits which nature presents us in the same season, the simple attribute is complex. It follows from what has been said that a compound subject is a union of several subjects, to all of which belongs the same attribute, and that a compound attribute is a union of several attributes, all of which belong to the same subject. To ascertain whether the subject of a proposition be simple or compound, we have only to observe whether this proposition can be resolved into several, which shall all have the same attribute and different subjects. For example, we perceive that in the proposition, peaches, apricots, and plums are excellent fruit, the subject is compound, inasmuch as we can substitute in place of the above sentence the three following propositions. Peaches are excellent, apricots are excellent, plums are excellent. And I forgot to mention the word fruit there at the end. These three propositions have all, it is seen, the same attribute, but each has for its subject a part of the compound subject of the original proposition. It is otherwise with this proposition. The peaches which I have eaten this year were very fine. The subject, the peaches which I have eaten this year, is simple, for I cannot divide the proposition to which it belongs into several. We may, in like manner, ascertain whether the attribute be compound, by attempting to separate the proposition into several propositions, which all shall have the same subject, but different attributes. We perceive, for example, that in this proposition, peaches are agreeable to the taste, delight, the smell, and charm the sight. The attribute is compound, because we can substitute for this the proposition the threefold following. No, not the threefold. The three following. Peaches are agreeable to the taste, peaches delight the smell, and peaches charm the sight. These three propositions have all the same subject, but they have each for an attribute a part of the compound attribute of the original proposition. You're welcome, Crack. It is otherwise with the proposition. Peaches are preferable to all other fruits which nature produces in our climate. Although the attribute, preferable to all other fruits which nature produces in our climate, is composed of several ideas, it is yet simple, for we cannot separate it into several particular attributes, to each of which we can give for a subject, peaches, and form by this division several propositions independent of each other. Alright. Now here come the brackets, which we are supposed to skip. We're not going to do that. Hence, if it is inquired whether in this proposition the love of virtue and the hatred of virtuous men are irreconcilable sentiments, the subject be simple or compound, it will not be difficult to discern that it is simple, although at first sight and without regard to the attribute it might appear to be compound. We have only to see whether it be possible to separate this proposition into two propositions, in each of which we can employ the attribute. if we cannot say the love of virtue is an irreconcilable sentiment, the hatred of virtuous men is an irreconcilable sentiment, which sentences are in fact nonsense, it follows that the subject is simple. Yeah? Not too hard, is it? It is the same with the attribute in the following proposition. To endure reproof without ill temper is a thing equally proper and difficult. Right, so if you try to break that into two propositions, you will get nowhere. The noun. And then, I'm sorry guys, but this, the ink must have ran out or something. I can't really read some of this. Having learned to, I guess it's, I don't know what it is, maybe distinguish? Having learned to distinguish in a proposition the subject, the verb, and the attribute, we proceed to examine what are the different kinds of words which enter into the something scission of the subject and attribute. I'm sorry guys, the ink is not good here. Noun. As the object of thought is always a single thing, it is necessary when we wish to communicate our thoughts to others by means of speech that we should inform them of this thing. Were it always before our eyes and the eyes of those whom we addressed, it would be sufficient to point it out to them. But if its nature be such that it cannot be perceived by the eyes, or if it be not present at that very moment, we can communicate an idea of it only in distinguishing it by its name. Yeah. Suppose that while Victor is engaged in play and not thinking of his cousin Joseph, Joseph suddenly enters. As soon as Victor sees him, he recognizes him. If, before Joseph has entered, someone should say to Victor, Joseph is coming, the mere pronunciation of the name Joseph would recall his entire image to the mind of Victor as perfectly as if he had seen him. It would not be merely some of the qualities of Joseph which Victor would perceive, it would be Joseph entirely and Joseph only. Names, or in the language of grammar, nouns, are therefore words which designate beings in a definite manner by recalling the idea of their nature. Alright, this has been enough. Why? Because it's time, guys. It is time. So, thank you, one and on, Vincent, Tomato, Otto, Jules, Joe, Hopper, Dan, and Captain Gringo. Thanks for staying tuned. We'll pick this up next week. This is good. This is nice. Good reading. And this has been UCY Radio. Check them out at ucy.tv. There's tomorrow a lot of live radio. I think the Sundays are very good
The very word secrecy is repugnant
at UCY Radio.
open society. And we are, as a people,
So thanks a lot, everybody.
and historically,
Take care.
societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of